Hey there, my name is Chris Acton with Acton Creative, and this is a Handwoven Experience, episode 87. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about when to divide your warp. So let's start at the beginning. You have carefully planned your beautiful project. You've put your guide string on the warping board, and you are following that with your yarns all the way down and back up your warp board, filling it in slowly with your project. But you start to notice that the pegs are starting to fill up. The pegs are only so long, and your yarns, even when you smash them on there, they're starting to really get close to the edge of the peg. Here is where I would suggest that you divide up your warp. And here's what I mean by that. If you have, say, a 30-inch project, take the first 15 inches and measure it on your warping board, and then chain it off, take it completely off, leaving your guide string so you know what the path is. Then take the next 15 inches and put it on your warping board. So you will have two warp chains for your project. Now, a couple things to go with that. First of all, when you are going to divide up your project, do it someplace that's really logical. Maybe it's a change in color, kind of like mine will be here. Mine are all different colors here. Or maybe it's a natural break in the pattern, but make sure that it kind of makes sense logically as to where you would put the two parts of your warp together, because they're going to have to come together in the very next step, whether you tackle the reed next, or if you are winding it on the loom and then putting it in the heddles. So whatever your next step is, you're going to have to put the two parts together. So make sure it's a logical break in the scheme of the entire warp. Now I've got a little tip for you too, as you think about doing two warp chains for your project, is take some scrap yarn. Just pick a color that's not gonna interfere, it's not gonna blend in. You want something obvious. Take some scrap yarn, and actually the very last yarn on this warp chain, let's see if I can find it there, just right there. Just take your yarn, tie a little knot or a little bow or something right there to indicate that this is your very last yarn. So when you take this all off and then you start the second part of your warp, take your matching yarn and put it on the very first warp yarn of that one, because then you'll know that I have to match up the two orange yarns, and that tells me how the two warp chains go together. Because you may be thinking, oh, it's really obvious, I'll know. Sometimes when you get it off the warping board and you're looking at it later, it's a little harder to distinguish which end goes with which. So just use your scrap yarn and make a little mark for yourself so you'll know how to match up the two parts of your warp. So just to recap, as you are putting your warp on your warping board, do not be afraid to put it into more than one chunk, because that is going to just make life easier. You don't have to worry about it sliding off the pegs. It's much easier. So put it into two chunks, or maybe even three if you have a really wide project. But to help yourself out, make sure that you give yourself a little visual cue as to how to put them back together once they're all off the warping board. So I hope that helps. And the next time that you are approaching a really wide project or something that has a lot of yarns, maybe even some fatter yarns, going to fill up your warping board quicker, don't be afraid. Break it into pieces, my friend, and then just make sure you give yourself a little note how to put it back together. All right. Hope that helps. Gives you something to think about. Have a great week, my friends. Happy weaving.